Let's dive in. So Kath's and Karen's books are very different, but their stories both share a remarkable intersection of love, identity, and radical transformation. And I'd like to get Katherine to start us off by telling us a little bit about the Swan Suit and doing a short reading.
Okay. First of all, hi, Mom. It's nice to see. It was nice to see people rolling in. And I'm a little nervous, but I will do my best. So the Swan Suit, here it is. This is my new book. It's a collection of short stories. Many are inspired by fairy tale themes, and they explore transformation and shape shifting, examining what it's like to live in a body that betrays and in a world that isn't always what it seems. Okay, so to start off, I'm going to do a short reading from the first story, which is called The Swan Suit. It's the title story. And I'll just set this up. This is, there's a fisherman, and the fisherman is out fishing, and he sees a swan who swims across a lake, climbs out of the water onto the beach, unzips a zipper embedded in some feathers, pulls it down, and the suit of feathers drops to the ground, and a fair young woman steps out, a naked maiden, beautiful. He falls in love with her. She goes for a little swim. He's watching, stunned, and then she comes out of the water, puts her suit back on, and flies away. And this is what happens when he goes home and tells his mother about it. "Mama, it was love at first sight," he swooned. "With this nymph, this goddess as my bride, I shall be the envy of all the men in town. Who else could claim their wife has the grace of a swan, the face of an angel, and the body of a Victoria's Secret model?" The fisherman's mother belched inside her throat and blew it out the side of her mouth. She used to be a beauty queen, but that was a long time ago. She didn't believe in soulmates anymore. "Quiet," she said. "I need to concentrate." The fisherman's mother was a gifted archer, and her talents had served them well on days when the fish didn't bite. Decades earlier, she'd decided she needed something to fall back on when she lost her looks, when her hair turned gray, when her skin became flaky, and when fat and gravity had their way with her torso and breasts. So she took up archery and practiced daily. Now, whenever her son failed to bring home fish for dinner, she would wait for a small animal to wander innocently into the garden, usually a rabbit, raccoon, or squirrel, but sometimes a woodpecker, once a stray cat, and once a three-legged Welsh terrier. And she'd point her weapon through a hole in the torn kitchen window screen, draw back her bow, and release the arrow with a sharp twang. She never missed. But like most former beauty queens, she was pretty lazy. Once she'd killed her prey, it was her son's responsibility to go outside, pull the arrow out of the bleeding animal's body, skin it, and prepare it for supper. "Believe it or not, kiddo, I have some experience in the field of courtship and love, so I suggest you pay attention." She shut one eye and took aim from between the green and yellow checkered curtains. "Now, go to the lake as usual tomorrow morning." The point of the arrow was a missile with a direct path into the heart of the hapless creature nosing for a grasshopper at the far side of the potato patch. Flonk! A marmot, right between his big brown eyes. The fisherman's mother placed the bow on the kitchen table, wiped her nose on her sleeve, and tucked a few stray gray hairs back into her bun. "With a box of chocolate. High quality, not just any old crap. I don't know much about swan food, but believe you me, no girl can refuse fine chocolate. And don't start talking about babies right off the bat. That'll turn her cold."
Wonderful. Thanks, Kath. That's some great advice from a mom. Now I'd like to invite Karen to introduce her novel, The Silence, and do a short reading as well.
Sure. So this is the book. I know it appears backwards, but I'd love to acknowledge the beautiful artwork of my dear friend Mark Preston, who is a Tlingit Tagish artist. And I thought that was quite appropriate since that's whose territory this book takes place on mostly. It also takes place in Vancouver. So the book is, I don't want to give too much away because really the book is about the mystery that Leah, the main character, must solve for herself. But it's about a character who is mixed. She's settler and Indigenous, so she's bridging both worlds. She has a foot in, both of those cultures, and also by virtue of being Indigenous, you have one foot in this world and one foot in the next, actually, in the sense that she's having a lot of dreams and visions, and she's hyper aware of guidance from the next world. So she discovers early on that she's missing some years of her life. She's missing some memory. And so her journey is essentially to come home to herself. And I don't want to say anything more because we'll reveal a bit more as we go. So this is a reading from chapter 1. In a way, dead Indians are just like live ones. They have senses of humor, even get a person in hot water. They steal my stuff. Like yesterday, I was late searching for my phone. It vanished from where I knew I'd just left it. I made a frantic search of the house, in case I was mistaken, which I knew damned well that I wasn't. Then there it was, in the same spot, in plain sight, placed exactly as I thought I'd left it. They always do that. It's like their punchline. Be so frustrating. They ask for things like tea with sugar and weird food, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Pepsi, jelly beans. I'm Leah. I grew up thinking I was poor white trash. When I was 15, I cornered my father, who confessed that we were Indian, like it was a crime. So if I was a poor Indian, at least that was a reason for being poor. I went to Whitehorse at 19 and I hooked up with Haywire, my first boyfriend. He was one of the first real Indians I'd ever met. The ones that always knew they were Indians. They didn't know hiding or being ashamed of it were options. I sure let Dad know, and he wasn't happy. Bonus bingo. Haywire's mother, Doris, was the only person that called him Arthur. All the Charlies in the family lived at Little Annie Lake. It's a ways out of Whitehorse, off the highway. The first winter, Haywire and I stayed out in the bush to trap. And I started having visits from the dead folks.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. I love the first line of your book. In a way, dead Indians are just like live ones. I thought, what is coming next? Wonderful. All right, let's dive into a few more questions. So, Kath, in the Swan Suit, the story seems to be about a young fisherman's pursuit of love. But what we discover is that his fumbling ambition exposes not only the masks and disguises and swan suits we wear intentionally, but the camouflage we wear that we don't even know we're wearing. So, as it relates to the fisherman and his mother, what is the danger of not knowing our own selves or our own identity?
That's a good question. Yeah, the story is all about revealing what's in underneath the costume, and I think the danger is that when there's a disconnect between what's inside and what's on the outside. That's where the struggle is, and we find in the story that there can even be costumes under the costumes, and that what we're wearing can change, but maybe what's inside is the same. Or is it influenced by the way we're presenting ourselves? And how is that dangerous?
There's so many layers, and I love the surprises of the layers on the layers. And yeah, you don't see it coming. Wonderful. All right, Karen. In the silence, Leah travels from her home in Vancouver to the Yukon, where she joins her former flame Haywire, and I love that name, by the way, to visit her beloved Uncle Angus, who's dying in hospital.
Mhm.
This journey really becomes a turning point for Leah in the sense of her own identity, a huge part of which is actually hidden from her. So can you tell us about why it is that it's love from the past that really becomes the ignition for her transformation?
You know, in my experience, there are very few things that can trigger major transformation, and love is one of them, whether it's love for a parent, or love for a relative, or love for a friend, or love for yourself. And I just think that love is a universal catalyst for us to be brave and transform. And it does take massive courage, of course, for all of us, even during COVID, just to cope with what's going on, and to come to terms with a new world, a new way of being. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I really love that about the book, because it could have been bitterness or anger that was the trigger, but it was love. And it was very powerful. Thank you. All right, now I've got a question for both of you. So I'm going to ask you the same question, give a little bit of an answer, and then do a short reading that supports the question. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the camouflage and disguises that are put on your two characters that come from outside forces? And here I'm thinking again of the fisherman's mother, love the fisherman's mother in the Swan Suit, and Leah in the Silence. So what are they having to confront and peel off, and how hard is it? Maybe we'll start with Karen.
I think that everything that we do, especially as Indigenous people, is so much inspired by ancestors and by the guidance that we receive from elsewhere through dreams, for what have you. But Leah is really having to be completely fearless. She's having to, when you have traumatic amnesia, which she does, and she's lost a couple of years of her life and memories, it takes her an immense amount of courage and fearlessness to figure out what happened, what is kind of the mystery in terms of why she can't remember. And so she approaches people in the north, and they're not ready to tell her. They know, they're wise enough to know she's not ready to hear yet, so they're kind enough to just give her a little bit. It's kind of like dealing with children, when you give them enough but not too much information. And so she just has to be fearless, and through trial and error, because she's never made this journey before, being guided in dreams, being guided through vision, she somehow makes her way home to herself.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And Kath, so what disguise does your character of the fisherman's mother have to confront and peel off, and how hard is it for her?
Well, she is a former beauty queen, so she is whose body and experience has changed a great deal. And what she really wants is to be a grandmother. So she wants to, her goal is to transform again into a vision of someone else that she sees. Yeah, so when she tries to finding out what's inside her and what she really is her struggle, and it ends very messily, very, very, very messily.
Great. And you know what? I'm going to have you read your paragraph, and then I'm going to jump back to Karen, because I realize I've skipped out Karen. My apologies. We'll come back.
Okay. So here's the character of the fisherman's mother, a little short paragraph that will illuminate her. Men worshipped her, but they never challenged her to a game of Othello or crib. They asked her for her hand in marriage, but never her opinion. They touched her all over her skin, but never penetrated her heart and engaged her mind. As she got older, her body changed. She knew it was inevitable. You look in the mirror one day and you don't even recognize your own reflection. You have a different outline and a different appetite. You leave a different footprint. Deep down, you're still the same, but there's something new about the shape of space you take up in the world.
Wonderful. I love that idea of the shape of the space you take up in the world, especially as we age. We start to think about these things so much more. Karen, could I have you read your paragraph, please, about Leah?
Sure. Now she's speaking to a journalist who is interviewing her about having been a very well-known singer-songwriter in the Yukon previously. So she's just discussing at this point identity and the painful search for, how to be walking in these two worlds as an Indigenous and settler woman. So many people I've met have asked me to help them satisfy the same yearning. How on earth do they sense that I can help them get home? Some who are asked are 60 scoop kids, adopted out. Some, like me, had parents who thought they could forget being Native. But somewhere, their Indianness, even a generation or two later, shapeshifts and spills out, floods, until the person's heart and spirit drives them forward to know who they are, where they're from. An elder once said to me, it isn't about blood quantum. It's about having the receivers built in to get those transmissions, those messages from your people in the next world.
Wonderful. I love that the character of Leah always, she feels those transmissions even before she knows about her heritage. It's just such a powerful part. And it's kind of in some ways the start of her transformation is when she, when her father finally admits that, yes, we are Indian.
Yeah.
All right. Now I'm just going to jump to some more short readings. I'm just finding my place here again. Got so much goodness packed in. Oh, and it's 6:25, so soon we are going to want to go to some questions as well from our audience. Let's jump into another short reading with Karen again.
Okay.
A second page would be wonderful. Thank you.
Got it. Don't be impressed that I trapped. The only thing we got all winter was a squirrel's foot. The squirrel left his foot behind, chewed off his own foot to get away. Either that, or the rest of him was eaten by a coyote. That's what Uncle Angus said. I feel awful about it to this day. Uncle Angus taught us to trap. He said it wasn't our fault we didn't get anything, because that winter was one big chinook, and the animals didn't need our trap bait. We got no fur, but I learned a lot. To listen to the instant I heard an unexpected gunshot off in the distance, for the doof at the end, to know that a bullet had hit an animal. And I could tell how many guns were going off. Like people, each gun has its own voice. I discovered the Indian phone. That's when you put out that you want to see somebody, and not long later they show up. And if you ask, got your Indian phone call? They always say, yes. Bush people are good at that. When you show up, they already have tea made and fresh bannock ready. They say, oh, so it was you who was coming. You can't surprise them. They just know somebody's going to show up. Grandma Maisie used to motion to the stove and say, tea de, in her Tagish accent as sweet as her tea. When I first showed up at Little Annie, Haywire and I had gone to visit one or two of the Charlies at their house for tea. I'm so light-skinned, they thought I was white. Bring that Chan over here so we could check her out, one of his aunties told him. He would grin. I guess he thought my long black hair would be a giveaway to who I really am. What he didn't know then, or what I didn't know then, was that he'd never brought a girl home. So it was a big deal. Haywire's mom didn't seem to like me. It wasn't anything personal. No woman was good enough for her boy. She did save my life once, though.
Wonderful. So having the ability and desire to listen is one of Leah's, the keys to her transformation. So I think in this passage, you can really see that. She's listening for gunshot, that sound, doof. She's listening for the Indian phone. And even the first time she meets Haywire, she walks beside him and he doesn't say anything to her. And this doesn't bother her. And they kind of sit in this beautiful silence. She's totally comfortable with that, which would, be really different for most of us. Leah's also a songwriter. And just a little aside to our audience, Karen's book comes with a CD of 14 songs, and the lyrics appear at the end, well, throughout the book, but at the end of each chapter as well. And Leah says at one point, songwriters love to hear partial songs. They get to hear the possibility when you stop after one verse and chorus. So what I'm curious about is, how is Leah, being a songwriter, connected to her ability to listen and accept partial stories about her past and those from the spirits she meets in her dreams?
Well, to be any kind of artist, I think, in my view, in whatever art that I do, I'm inspired by nature, by spiritual encounters, by dreams, by visions, I guess. And I think as all artists, Leah is guided by the next world, and she's inspired, and she holds space for her songwriting there, knowing that it's like she's translating from something that's coming from the next world. So she's translating the messages or the signs or even the sounds. It might be, the rhythm of how the crows caw outside, or all of those things come into account when you're songwriting, because you've got the music and you've got the poetry in a song. It's an unusual art form. So her inspiration is from a lot of different places. It's from things, just little photographs of people she passes on the street, or she's empathic, so she's picking up other people's emotion. If she sees a young man at the railway station, she conjures a whole story about the young man from the railway station. And that song is Letters from Babylon.
Great.
Yeah, and the reason I wrote that was I was with an African friend. I had lived in Zimbabwe for 3 years, and a friend came over, and he and I were walking in downtown Victoria, and he went very quiet, and he said, "Don't you see that this is like Babylon?" And I looked at all these beautiful shining buildings, and I thought about the reality for people like homeless people and people in poverty, and I thought, yeah, I can see how he feels that. And that sort of gives you an idea of kind of where a songwriter gets inspiration.
A great story. Kath, can we shift to you and a second story from your collection titled Happy?
Happy? Big question mark. How do we get happy? Okay, this is a story of, Happy is a story of a couple, Babs and Phil. It's also, it's a little bit horrifying. I like to mix humor and horror in my writing. So Babs basically, and this is from near the end of the story. The backstory is that Babs, in this short piece, is that they've been married for quite a while, and Babs just gets tired of having a physical relationship with her husband. So she decides to do something about it and make herself inaccessible. That's probably all I should say. It's not pretty, but she makes herself so that she cannot be intimate, and she takes control in that way. Now, the women in the neighborhood feel terrible for poor Phil. And here's how it goes. Neighborhood women in tank tops and Lululemon pants brought casseroles by for Phil. Banana bread. They told him they'd always thought Babs had been a very lucky woman. They couldn't believe she'd just run off like that. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, they'd recite. She's crazy to leave a catch like you. They told him that their husbands were workaholics who didn't understand them. They told him that they knew a little bit about loneliness themselves. They asked him if he was ticklish. The more he ignored their flirtations, the more blatant they became. Kirsten drew her finger across her bottom lip and told him he had the body of a long-distance runner. Dagmar put a hand on his knee, said he reminded her of Richard Branson, and suggested they go out dancing one night. Terry Lynn said she wanted to screw his brains out. You couldn't blame the women for being attracted to him. There's a certain confidence exuded by a humble man who seems ambivalent towards sex, a man who could take it or leave it. You seem so spiritual, said Lynette, who didn't care whether he was well hung or not. I bet he's into doing it all Kama Sutra, tantric style. They told him that no, of course they didn't think it was weird the amount of time he stood out there in the back garden, barefoot in the soil, with his arms in the air like some kind of scarecrow, next to that rose bush. Maybe they were lying. Maybe they did think it was weird. But just like the idea of an eccentric single man who still wore his wedding ring, the strong, silent, dedicated, earthy type, and they were just trying not to hurt his feelings. It's true that Phil's body had become long and lithe, his skin a smooth amber hue. However, he would not have described himself as having the limbs of a dancer. When he looked in the mirror, he saw more of an Ichabod Crane type, the cartoon version. But the more time he spent with his bare feet planted in the soil, in the back garden, and his face to the sun, the more he understood this allure of photosynthesis, of warmth and sunshine and quiet companionship.
Wonderful, Kath. The physical transformations are quite surprising. I love them. Not going to give away anything, but really, Kafka would be proud. And so Babs takes these extreme measures, and Phil seems really quite oblivious to her needs until she is literally no longer physically available. And this is kind of a turning point for him, a transformation of understanding. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. What is it? Is it love, envy? Is he just, carrying on after decades of marriage? What's that about?
Okay, his transformation of understanding starts because, it starts in, he takes it quite personally when she closes down. And I'll just give you a hint. It starts off with some silicone sealant from a caulking gun is involved. So there's a hint. And he takes it personally. He's like, oh, you're not attracted to me anymore. Oh, it's because I'm balding, and oh, I don't make enough money. It's all about him. So her needs and desires and those are changing. He makes it about him. And gradually, the transformation that he experiences is a realization that actually that attraction has way less to do with him. In fact, nothing. It's not about him. It's about her need to control her body, her experiences. And when he finally understands that it's her and not them, and not him, then that's when he can experience a genuine love. And it is a love story.
Yeah, it's very touching, despite the extreme nature. Great. Okay, well, we have got about 25 minutes or so. So let's jump into the questions from our audience. Now, we were sent a whole bunch of questions in advance, and I see there's a few questions in our Q&A box as well. So let's dive right in. And I've got a question for both of you, and this one came up a few times. Was there anything you decided to leave out of your stories, either because you felt you should, or perhaps your editor did, that you wish you hadn't had to? Who would like to start? Kath.
Okay, well, there was a story that, because it's short stories, and when I submitted them, there was one story that the editor recommended that I take out. We went back and forth about story order and which should be first, and but there was one that was left out, and it's a story that it's got some more biblical references, and it was the only one that had biblical references. So it didn't really fit with the theme that weaves more of a fairy tale kind of thing. So I was kind of sad that one didn't make it in, but I think it'll go into another collection.
Excellent. Well, that gets you started on the next one, hey? You feel like you've already, got one foot forward.
No, one. I can look forward to that next one. Yeah.
How about you, Karen? Did you experience that?
Oh, I certainly did. I didn't actually. I was trying to be really fearless with this piece, and with all my pieces, I really try not to edit anything, in the sense of, if I feel compelled to write something, even if the scariest stuff is what I really like to write, because it's the hardest, and it's a really good practice to write that which scares you to write. It mostly turns out to be the most powerful piece. The editors, the content editors from Exile Publishing, I think the book, it got chopped about a third, so they murdered off they murdered off Leah's boyfriend, this white guy. And I really loved it, because they had this dynamic where she was teasing the heck out of him, as Indigenous women will do, and he was taking it all seriously. So it was kind of showing excuse me, that very subtle and sometimes not so subtle cultural clash that happens, and how tough it is to sort of bridge those moments where it's totally a cultural thing. So yeah, Phil, I had a Phil too. Katherine, we both had Phils. Yeah, so Phil died a horrible death. I think he's mentioned somewhere in there. And then the other thing, there was a quite wonderful scene that I thought should stay in, and that was at a potlatch in the Yukon, where I believe it was the first potlatch, because there's two potlatches. When somebody passes, so when the uncle passed, there's a potlatch as part of, at the end of the funeral, and that's kind of the celebration of life after the funeral. And everybody goes from crying in the graveyard or by the graveside to being very happy and jolly and in a really good state of mind at the potlatch. It's really quite a beautiful transformation to see. And there's also a potlatch that happens about 1 year later, when they do a headstone for the person, and it's a 1 year remembrance. And often it's very difficult for people to do it within a year, but it happens eventually. So at the first potlatch, there was Leah was asked to help the ladies, and it's a bit of stress to cook for an entire potlatch, and especially cooking traditional foods in a traditional way. So there's this wonderful scene that I really loved, where Leah's in the kitchen, and it's all the women catching her up on everything that's happened since she's been gone, and there's absolute hilarity. The way that the women interact, the expressions they use, those unique northern colloquialisms. There's one person that says something like, this one married, Jimmy Charlie, and somebody else makes a comment, well, that will explain this kind of stunned look on her kid's face, and everybody laughs, including the one who laughs the loudest is his wife. And they just teased each other, and it's this wonderful gathering of women that is really heartwarming and sweet. And it's Leah's first very frightening encounter with a character that is integral to the story. And it was a very powerful scene, but they decided that they didn't want it in there. They wanted, the content editor sort of explained it like this. He wanted to keep the spirit of the book, and he felt that the spiritual encounters that Leah was having was more important than things like that. So I guess maybe I should, turn that piece. I've been wondering how to use that in a short story, but I don't know how. So
Excellent.
But that story should be out there because it's lovely.
Mhm. It sounds wonderful, and both your stories have such rich humor. So even though there's, you know, some tragedy and dark stuff, they're both so funny as well in different ways. Um, can I ask you now, maybe jumping back to Kathy, and what was your hardest scene to write?
The hardest scene to write. Well, first of all, for me, every single ending of every single story, I'm terrible at wrapping things up. I'm terrible at endings. So every single last page of every single story was very hard. My mentor, Gigi Gardner, says that endings should be surprising yet inevitable. And I work really hard on endings and end up writing about 10 different ones and going with, I need to just do a novel so I only have one to deal with. But no, one difficult scene was a sex scene that I wrote on the bathroom floor, well, on the sink and the floor. That's tricky. I mean, to write and to do. So,
Oh, that's funny. Oh dear.
And how about you, Karen?
Well, I
Is there
thought
a
my sex
scene?
scenes, I had quite a bit of sex, as you know, and I mean, in my book, personal confessions. And when I met with the grandpa of Exile Publishing, who's the son of Morley Callahan, he said to me, "Your sex scenes are ludicrous." And I burst out laughing. I thought that was so delightful. And he was quite shocked. I mean, who would laugh at such a criticism? And I howled with laughter and said, I can't wait to get home and tell my partner that my sex scenes are ludicrous. And so I went back and I sat in Toronto in the heat at my friend's backyard and pounded away and rewrote them so that they weren't, I thought or hoped, like a True Confessions magazine or whatever those were, the Harlequins. But so actually I didn't find that difficult. The most difficult scene was, I think it was a scene that was written in Banff, and I was just struggling with it. And my friend, interestingly enough, from the Wolf Clan, she's Ducklawady, was there at the same time. And she said to me, Karen, I want you to go to your room or go somewhere where you're feeling quiet. I want you to close your eyes, hit record on your phone, and I want you to talk that scene. Just speak it to yourself. And I did, and it was quite remarkable. So if you're ever stuck in your writing, it's a great tool to use. And that's the scene of the spider walking on her skin. And it's very poetic. I really love that. But she gave me a fantastic solution for that. So I'm pretty grateful to Sheila. Thank you, Sheila Clark.
That is brilliant.
My wolf sister. She calls me her wolf sister. So
That's
thank you to
brilliant,
her.
and I am totally going to steal that idea. All the writers in the audience.
Oh, yeah.
What a great idea. I've never done that.
Yep, she's a genius.
Okay, now I'd like to ask a specific question for Kath. And I'm going to attempt to combo two questions. So I'd like to know, what made you interested in traditional myths or fairy tales, and do you do research on those elements? So, for example, scrolling through the questions, like the witches, or I'm trying to think of some of the different quirky things you have in there. Well, maybe start with the first part and I'll add on to it.
So why am I attracted to traditional storytelling? Because, and this relates to the second question, is because essentially I'm pretty lazy. And I feel like, no, it's true. It's because if I use an established trope, an established idea of a fairy tale form, then the reader is coming into it with already having some expectations, and I have to explain less. We can jump into that situation, or we have already expectations that will enable me to just sort of, the reader, I'm not creating images or ideas that are absolutely brand spanking new. So it allows me to, it just gives a little edge up for the mythology. My first book was mythology heavy, and this one's got more of a fairy tale. And yeah, it just allows me to kind of enter a room where people already know what to expect. And then you can go a little crazy. So it just gives a bit of a boost. And did I do much research?
Yeah. So like witches, trolls, nasal cannulas.
Yeah, no, that's back to my first answer is not so much because of the lazy thing. So yes, I did do some, but I figured if I had to research it a ton to find out, a lot of, yes, I wanted it to be believable in an unbelievable way, but I also wanted it to, so all the, it had to have verisimilitude and be like acceptable to the reader to make the leaps that I'm asking. But I didn't do a ton of research. Yeah.
All right, good to know. Straight out of the old noggin. Karen, I've got a question for you. From one of from Debbie. I was moved by how you speak about your characters. You talk about them like they are cherished family members. Has it been difficult releasing the story into the world? Are you still talking to your characters?
I'm going to make a confession. Most writers, their writing is confessional. Not that we've done bad things, but it's our experience with the world. So there's so much of us in our writing, and a lot of these characters, I think, I'm trying to remember, most of these characters are people that I knew. Most of these characters are people that passed away way too young. And their stories needed to be told and honored. And this book is a love letter to the people of the Tlingit and Tagish lands in the south of Yukon. Do I talk to them? I pray for them every day. They certainly talk to me. That there's one passage about fire, and that's about cousin Johnny, and he's discussing how he passed away, and that one actually came straight through. It was like he was dictating, and I just wrote it out, and I didn't make much change to that. So I probably should talk to them. In our way, we feed people that are in the next world often. We leave offerings for them. So thanks for that reminder, Debbie. I should probably feed them. And I wasn't afraid to release this to the world because it was a love letter. I was a bit concerned. I wanted to be sure that I got the cultural information correctly because I'm not from the culture. I had to learn the culture because I was immersed in the culture and lived amongst the people. But so that, I guess, was a bit worrisome in a sense, but I just had to do it, so I did it.
Great. Can I ask you what challenges you, Karen, in your writing?
What challenges me? Right now, it's to keep a practice up because I don't believe in writer's block. I refuse to believe in writer's block, but there's long periods of time when I have not written. Right now, I think it's been almost 2 years. I've written little bits here and there, but I'm not too concerned about it because I started painting and doing other things. And one art feeds the other art. I used to sit down and write every single day. For years, I made coffee in the morning. I sat down and I started writing. But I think editing has always been a bit of a challenge for me, or rewriting has been a challenge because I feel like I'm translating from somebody from somewhere else. And so I don't want to mess with, I want to get it right, if that makes sense. So it's always been a bit daunting to edit. And to work with editors was quite excruciating in this case, because if you're an Indigenous writer and you're working with non-Indigenous editors, sometimes you have to defend things and it becomes really quite painful. In some instances, I had to, I'd read an email and just go, and I had to sit on it for 24 hours and be very thoughtful about my response and very kind, because they'd be stepping on nerves without knowing they were. They just really didn't know. So that that part, I think, is the challenge. But I learned a huge amount, and I hope that I also shared a lot in my explanations of why, yeah, this part's not negotiable. This is, and Sundance is one word. It's not two words. And this is why, because somebody said it was the Oxford Dictionary definition. And that's when I went 0 to 60, because I'm kind of like, yeah, English people are not in a position to tell us what is correct. That's a translation from another language. So I just very patiently explained. So that's the challenge for me.
Mhm.
They were wonderful editors, not to slag on them, but sometimes they don't know culture, and so they'll go by the Oxford Dictionary instead of
Indeed,
saying,
and yeah, copy editors can be real sticklers for these little
oh yeah,
details that are perhaps, those of us who feel language is fluid
yes,
and society is fluid, maybe
yeah,
have to argue some of those points.
yeah.
So yeah, Kath, for you, any challenges, fights you're having with your writing?
Well, I agree with Karen about writer's block, that I don't think it's a thing. I think the thing is distraction and focus and being able to follow a flow of an idea, follow it and stay with it, stay with your thought. Even when it gets challenging to write, or you're not quite sure, there's something there. Even if you're not sure that it's going to be right, write it anyways, and you can come back. Karen and I differ in that I actually really love the editing process. What challenges me is the blank. There's nothing. I got to just put something on it. And once I get going and once I have something to work with, I find that that's like just, okay, I'm already in the water. I'm swimming now. And as opposed to like getting in that first moment where it's like you're cold and it's gonna not be comfortable. So I really enjoy the editing process, and thank heavens for copy editors is all I can say, because I needed mine, that's for sure, for a lot of the fine tuning of this book. So
Indeed. Kath, can you tell us what was the inspiration, either story?
Oh, you mean between the two of Happy and the Swan Suit?
Yeah, or tell us the inspiration for both.
In both of those ones, and it's similar to many of these stories, the inspiration for me comes from a very small image, and then I just build onto the small image. Like for the Swan Suit, I just, the image that I got was that a big bird like a swan, has a zipper. So I had this image in my mind of a zipper on a swan. That's it. A zipper on a swan. Okay, what happens when you undo that zipper? What's going to come out? Well, it's not going to be just swan guts. It's going to be something more magical. And then what's going to be inside there? And then what happens to that person? And so that's what I think that's what I mean by following the thought. If I start with an image, and this is just a short story thing. I haven't written a novel, so I don't know. But for a short story, I find that taking an image that's really strong and interesting, and then exploring where it goes, is and also with Happy, I did have the image of a woman closing herself permanently, intentionally, and then who would do that, and what kind of relationship is that would she have? What happens next? It's all about, well, what does that mean? So yes.
I find that fascinating, Kath, because I think it was Michael Ondaatje said for the English Patient, he had an image in his mind, and it was a man falling from a plane, or falling through the sky. It wasn't even a plane, I don't think, at that point. And that he wrote this book from just in his mind, right? So
that scene too,
you're using the Ondaatje method, clearly.
Yeah, there you go.
Karen, how about you? What was your inspiration?
I had a few. The Yukon is such a spectacular landscape. I wanted to make the land a character. And I wanted to take readers there because not everybody's been there. And I encountered somebody from National Geographic up there once when I was living there. And I said, what's the most beautiful place you've ever photographed? And they said, right here. And they were just gobsmacked with the beauty of the place. And so I really wanted to take people there. I wanted to honor the people that I knew and loved there. I wanted to share the culture because I wasn't sure that anybody had ever written anything about the Tlingit Tagish people in the form of a novel. There's been lots of ethnographic research and such, but it's a while back. I mean, I wrote this 9 years ago. I think the idea I conceived of while I was in a course in Banff. It was an Indigenous writers course, and I remember Witi Chimera, who is the whale writer, and it's now it was made into a film. He's done a couple of amazing films, and he was a very generous and wonderful faculty member. And when I gave him my outline for the book, he said, if you don't write this book, I'm going to. So I did.
That is a good reason to write the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're closing in on 7 o'clock, and so I would like to thank both of you for a really illuminating evening. To our audience, if you'd like to learn more about their writing, go to their websites at katherinefawcett.com and karenleewhite.com. So a huge thank you to all of you for coming to this event, our first time. Very special thank you to Stella and Dave, who are backstage on Zoom running the technology. Thank you so much for being brave to do this. I know Stella, she's laughing at me. She's like, oh, really? We're going to do this. Thank you too to Ruth Barrow for the web design, Dan Ellis of Armchair Books. On that note, don't forget to pop over to our website to get your copies. You can also go to Armchair. And if you happen to live in Whistler or Squamish, Armchair Books will do free delivery. So, think about that. If you're not in the Sea to Sky, you can pop to your local bookstore or Amazon. And now I have a very special goodbye treat for you. We're going to say farewell and have Karen sing us out into the evening with a song that is from her book.
Actually, sorry, this one isn't.
Oh, this one is not?
It's not. This has not been recorded or mastered, but I like the song.
I love the song too.
Yeah, and Marilyn Dumont, who is that wonderful Métis poet of sheer genius, made me repeat the lyrics to her very slowly. So I came to love this more and more. So it's called Cinnamon Whiskey, which is kind of ironic because I don't drink.
Thanks, Karen.
Cinnamon whiskey, lucky beer. Only ticket out of here. I'm a painter, Indian through and through. Coming down the road, coming back to you. Well, I got no coin and I got no truck. Packed my hopes at a prayer for luck. Words of love running through my head. They all run together like a sinew thread. style moccasins never come apart. You're a wildfire burning in my heart. Lines on my face tell a story I know, like rabbit tracks left in the snow. Our stories run together like a wildwood stream, flowing through the night into my dreams. Like game tracks near a trapper's trail, or the water of life in a shining pail. Cinnamon whiskey, lucky beer. It ain't the only ticket out of here. I'm a painter, Indian through and through, and I'm coming down the road, coming back to you. Coming down the road, coming back to you. Coming down the road, coming back to you.
Wow. Beautiful. I've got chills. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for a wonderful evening.
Thank you,
And
Beth.
thank you to all of our guests for being here tonight. Look out for more events this summer and stay safe.